The place of no boundaries. The all-encompassing ocean connects all coral reefs, river mouths and city shores to icy Antarctica and the Arctic, islands, deserts, forests and agricultural lands. In the seas, giant physical forces are at work. Atmosphere, carbon dioxide, clouds, wind-blown dust, warm sea surfaces, cold dark depths, upwellings, ocean currents, winds, waves, all constrained to drive global climate and events. These in turn are driving the wheels within wheels of life, nutrients circulating, the migrations and flushes of oxygen-making plankton, the complex ebb and flow of creatures in webs of dependencies, tipping balance and equilibrium. Big places and little places, sheltering little lives, are all interconnected. The Antarctic and Southern Ocean are key. From the Antarctic depths, an alien drifting world is created, a thick, extravagant soup of life. This is the world of plankton, where all plant and animal life floats. Plankton is its own universe. As on Earth, the basis of all its life is the chlorophyll-containing plants, the plant plankton. But they bear little visual resemblance to green earthlings. These ocean aliens are microscopic algae and particular bacteria, some smaller than the diameter of a human hair. Their size belies their significance. Besides trapping carbon dioxide, their vital activities of photosynthesis account for half of the planet's oxygen, and their life activities sustain much else besides, including climate. Let's go and have a look at the plankton universe and what it's doing. This is a very simplified food web of a few animal and plant types, not to scale. The arrows point to the consumers. Plant plankton are eaten by animal plankton. Animal plankton eaten by krill, which is actually part of the plankton, eaten by squid, giant sperm whale. Think of it as a 3D wobbling, balanced jigsaw. Looking at the most important basic source of food, one comes to the krill and animal plankton. Now when these munch on the plant plankton, a sulfurous chemical is produced which is broken down by bacteria to DMS, which we know as the smell of the sea. This gas rises up into the atmosphere, makes clouds, which reflect heat, benefit the planet's temperature, and make a cooling effect. The copepods, here and here, they're actually the size of a rice grain. They have a hard shell, like the crab larva. These two are to scale. When these animal plankton, particularly the copepods, the uneaten ones, die, they sink and fall down and down like snow. They're taking their carbon, which is in their hard shells, down to the very deep sea sink, out of reach for immeasurably long timescales. These are small, minute, however, the multitudes of them is what makes them enormously significant. Some creatures live in the deep sea, like squid, eaten by the sperm whale. Now, in the deep sea, of course, got another ecosystem and nutrients. Now, when the sperm whale comes up to breathe, which it does every 45 minutes or an hour, it then dives, and it dives deep to feed on more giant squid, and before it dives, it poos the waste from the nutrient in the deep. Here you can see a whale diving, and here is its signature poo after it's dived. This is immensely significant because it's bringing nutrients from the deep right up to be available at the surface. Each whale does this every 45 minutes off the east coast of New Zealand. While you track around the food web and hold it in your mind, I'll show you some bigger animals of the floating plankton. Some of these you might be more familiar with, having seen them from boats or washed up stranded on beaches. Now I'm going to take you on a whistle-stop tour of the animals, some drawings of the animals I have encountered, a few of the animals from the books. These are from cold seas, north and south, and warm equatorial seas. In all these, basic simplified food web is similar. On beaches, rocks and cliffs, animals from the sky and the land visit and they become part of it, in a web of exchange, breeding, eating and be eaten. And some have unexpected connections with us, which I'm going to tell you about. Here we've got the whales, with the size of a person, southern right, humpback, sperm whale. Whaling has had an extraordinary, unexpected effect that has been sorted out and understood. The whaling actually caused the disappearance of giant kelp in the Canadian waters. Now, how on earth are those two connected? Basically, the kelp is eaten by spiny sea urchins, which are eaten by sea otters and orcas, which were eating the whales, suddenly found they had no food, and so they turned to sea otters. So when the orcas started eating the sea otters, of course the sea urchins increased enormously, and they ate the giant kelp. And the forests disappeared, and all of the nursery fish that were in there and the incredible biodiversity went too. Fortunately, this has been rectified in the meantime. Then we come to fish. Now these fish have an unexpected effect on making the southern right whales really eating into their population horrendously. Now this has worked in an extraordinary way in that the fish were used big bulk amounts for canning in Argentina. Their guts and entrails were put out into the sea, and so gulls, which feed on such things, they increased their population. The particular gull involved was the kelp gull, which is a gull which has an enormous chisel-shaped wedgy beak, very powerful. When they stopped doing the fish canning and all this food entering the ocean, which had increased the population of the gulls, disappeared, they had to look for a new source of food. What did they look for? They saw the southern right whales, which hang about quite a lot on the surface. And in this area, these southern rights breed. And so they turned to gouging their beaks into the soft skin of the whales, particularly the calves. So they switched their diet to living blubber and flesh. And they've since turned their attentions to seal pups in Africa. Now we come to another fish that we have transported accidentally from the Indian Ocean, where it's perfectly adapted. There are predators that keep it under control, and we have accidentally transported it to the Atlantic, where it does not have those predators. They are voracious predators. They eat everything in sight, and they're taking an enormous toll down the east coast of America and South America, affecting our fish industries. Now we come to the albatross and their kind. These are a small type of southern albatross, and this is a southern giant petrel. In the same group are our fulmars. These are birds with extraordinary tube noses. They actually have an incredible sense of smell. The tube nose is the knob on top of the beak. Now, interestingly, these birds, they find their krill and small fish, which are dotted far, far away in the ocean, by means of the DMS caused when the krill and the small plankton are munching into the plant plankton. And so the DMS is acting as beacon guides across the ocean for these birds to find their food. This particular great southern petrel had flown off course, was fortunately picked up by a carer. While it was convalescing, it was going for a walk with a family dog along the beach. When it's released, it will be back in the wild, behaving like a usual petrel. Here is one going for the afterbirth of sea lions. Now, the creatures that were not in the food web, but are all there, are of course the dolphins, the seals, and the sea lions. Now we're coming to our own seals and the otter from the northeast of Scotland. Now, I mentioned that there are land creatures also feeding into this immense, complicated puzzle of rather sad relevance is this creature, Rosenberg's monitor lizard. The recent bushfires in Australia were extreme and vast compared to the past due to climate change. On Kangaroo Island, which is a large island, half of it is a national park, sanctuary for threatened species, has been since 1924. That is where the last Rosenberg monitors were. It's been burnt out totally, and it's now feared that these are actually extinct. That is in between the proof checking and printing of my book. This is the floor of a mangrove swamp, an incredibly important shore from the point of view of input and nursery for fish and so on of the food web. These are disappearing because they're being converted to fish nurseries to provide prawns for our supermarkets. River wetlands are also incredibly important for feeding, as they feed land stuff and droppings, decaying plants, etc., into the sea. This is a pristine Northern Territory wetland. In Australia, that is a saltwater crocodile. A completely different type of land ecosystem there. This is the west coast of Australia, a wilderness arid shore, no habitation, so no runoff and fertilisers or silt going onto the reef, a wonderful coral reef just offshore. It is an economy based on termites. They're the equivalent to the grazers of the Serengeti, masses of them. The termite nests, some of them are several hundred years old, the tallest 10 foot. This is one of the extraordinary creatures that lives on the termites. That's an Australian bustard. Now we come to turtles in the sea. Now these, as most people now realise, feed on, this is a giant leatherback, which feeds on jellyfish and of course floating plastic bags glitter in the sea and look like jellyfish, causing immense problems. Similarly, the albatross type birds, the tube noses, in seeking out the DMS, which is the sign that there is good food just below the surface, they are getting plastic instead, because plastic, when it's degraded by the bacteria, produces DMS, and of course they don't know which is which. Now, the plastics, in our 40 years of beach combing on Dunnet Beach in the northeast of Scotland, as we started, it was wood and jute rope bits and pieces. Over that time scale, that turned to plastic, and latterly, amazingly, suddenly it was covered in confetti-like bits. And these confetti brightly coloured bits were teeny-weeny bits of plastic on their way to becoming nanoplastics. And in that same dangerous box, you can put the microfibers from our synthetic fibres of clothing, curtains, go into the washing machine, down the drain into the rivers and into the sea. They get into the bodies of all of these in the food web. Things like the copepods and the crab larvae. These become unhealthy. Their hard shells, of course, have got, very tiny shells have got carbon. They become unhealthy. The bodies actually disintegrate before they sink, so the vast amount of carbon from these multitudes doesn't enter the very deep carbon sink. Let's move to some good people doing good things. People I've been fortunate enough to, they appear in my encounters. Now we'll just return to the island I mentioned previously, the tiny little island in the Pacific, which is here, Europic. Now, these people have no carbon footprint. Sounds like a go-go paradise. The tropical good life of holiday resort brochures. These self-sufficient people live sustainably. Beds of plaited palm fronds, houses of plaited palm fronds and coral blocks, cooking utensils of palm fronds and coconut shells, clan traditions. The chief decrees when they can catch a turtle and have some meat, so there's no overfishing. In a dream world, would you and I choose it? There's no electricity for a fridge, so when there's bad seas and typhoons, no fishing, so you have old fish boiled 5 days running. No sanitation, you go to the side of the island where the current is, taking the sea and your pee, etc. away from the island. You have an emergency medical help needed, 65 miles through shark-infested waters in an open boat with one outboard with barely enough fuel. To get to another island, to then wait for the one American missionary plane to come from the capital. As just a small point here, our son's adoptive father died very young. It is an area of typhoons, particularly which they become extraordinarily extreme recently. We actually were caught in a super typhoon in 2004 without a food and water supply in the place we were staying. There's a minute-by-minute account of it and the terrible aftermath in chapter 5 and 6 of Try Not to Smile. You won't smile. People say it's gripping. Now we come to zoos, sanctuaries, museums, where these pictures I was able to take, look at detailed things that you can't normally see in the wild, like how they swim and particular species. This is in the Natural History Museum. It's a model of the giant squid, which was on the food web, eaten by the sperm whale. That's the size of it compared to my husband. In the Natural History Museum, of course, they're doing extraordinarily important research on ocean history and DNA work, which is contributing to work on climate change. And the zoos are captive breeding, releasing into the wild, and sanctuaries doing the same. Also, we met some amazing individuals, ordinary people, not paid or professional or that sort of thing. This is in Seychelles, digging out little turtle hatchlings about to hatch because they're monitored so they know exactly when they're going to be digging wildly for the surface. It's at that point that they get severely predated by crabs, and so they're taking them out, putting them in the bowl, take them to the top of the beach, try and keep the crabs off as the hatchlings race for the sea. A lady tending, this is New Zealand, the yellow-eyed penguin, the most endangered penguin on the globe, been injured by a fish, its innards torn out, she took it to the vet and so on. Here an amazing man who rescues creatures in storms and so on in his battered old kayak, moored to an old traffic cone. He actually swims, he knows all of the sea lions individually. He swims, these are males, very large Australian sea lions, the most endangered sea lions in the world. There's another yellow-eyed penguin in an ideal home contrived by two farmers who started an amazing sanctuary and large natural area, nature reserve in New Zealand. And then we come to Antarctica. This is where my brother-in-law, James Scourse, we met him at the beginning of the talk with Icelandic clams. Here we have a glacier receding at alarming pace. This is in January this year. In the snow, they're bringing up a sample of the creatures and plankton and so on in the sea just below there. That is the James Clark Ross, the research vessel. This was they're doing the same area for 3 years running, so they're monitoring how it changes. Here they are dealing with their specimens, some still with their woolly hats. There's my brother-in-law. And they're moving on now, or he's moving on now with his team and others, doing an extraordinarily large project in sea change, which you can actually look this up on the internet. And on that hopeful note, I will leave you. In case anybody would like a copy of either book probably the most simple thing is if you email me.